All right. All right, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. All right. So you and I have known each other for what? How long? About a year?
3 months, 4 months. I feel
Oh,
like people know
oh
each other.
no, it's
Has been that? Oh God, it's November. I just realized.
You're like, it's still like April, right?
Oh man, I already made plans for summer vacation.
Well, I think it's a bit too late for that now. But hey,
That must have been a
just wait a
really
little bit
long nap.
longer, and then you can fulfill those summer vacation plans.
Just a little longer.
So you are probably one of the few people that I know that I would define as an intellectual. Um,
Question.
yes,
1 second. You said that you didn't know anybody who had read 1984. Uh,
yes.
do you go to middle school?
No, I'm in
I
high
thought like
school.
I thought everybody.
And
Yeah, I thought everybody in high school had read 1984 by that point. Like the teachers require it.
nope, just I, I think I imagine it's probably just because a lot of in some places it's just because when you think about it, nobody ever talks about this, but it's a pretty rough book. Like it's not for the faint of heart. Like
Yeah, it's
there's a
pretty
lot
metal.
of just like this will send someone into deep depression reading this book if you're not mentally prepared. Um, but yeah, I don't know how more people have not read this book because and of course like you'll hear every so often like a news anchor or something will say the word Orwellian, or something along those lines, and you'll be like, "What's Orwellian mean?" And then somebody will Google it and be like, "Oh, okay, that's what that means." Um, so it's still of course, it's still a relevant book, I think, today. Um, it's probably more relevant, I think, than it would have been in 1984. When you think about it, it's because the oh, by the way, audience listening, we are going to do spoilers for the book. So if you wish to read it, then I suggest you do that, now. Read it and come back. Um, but there's a lot of different. I think the reason I love this book so much though is because it tackles a lot of different messages and themes towards various topics, in the book. Like it goes over a lot in a relatively, short book. Um, but I mean, I love it. What are your thoughts on the book in general?
Okay, well, to reiterate, a lot of people think Orwell was anti-communist, but
Mm-hmm.
actually it was kind of pro-communist. Though not, super for it. It wasn't leading a revolution or anything. He just
Right,
really hated the Soviet Union and just fascism in general. And
right.
so,
He hated
1984 isn't
elitism and
that
control
true?
over the over trying to assert use your power in a negative way to control people. Um, yeah. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So he remembered. So it's really just a critique on the United States as much as it is the Soviet Union, because of McCarthyism and the Red Scare, and just how much the government was kind of trying to probe into people's lives, figure out if they were communists. And so this is
Right.
kind of like a backlash to that.
Or like the Patriot Act.
And yeah,
You
like the
could you
Patriot
could
Act.
you could ascribe it to that as well.
Yeah, but Patriot Act didn't exist when he wrote it though. But
Right, right. I'm just saying it's would be a
sometimes
yeah. Go ahead.
life is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
So yeah, another thing that people never notice or really point out about 1984 is that it's kind of an anti-Aesop. Do you know what an Aesop is?
I'm not familiar with it. No.
Well, it derives from the Aesopica or Aesop's fables, which was a basically a bunch of stories told by a Greek slave around like 1600 BC. I mean, sorry, 600 BC. And so basically at the end, the hero would always learn like a lesson. And so like with kids television, every episode is an Aesop, like don't be mean to people you've never met
Right.
before and stuff like that. But you see, the thing about 1984 is it's an anti-Aesop because the overall message of 1984 is that love cannot conquer all, and that love will be defeated by external factors if they're powerful enough.
Right. This is not a happy book. There is
No.
zero happy ending to this at all. I mean, this has, I think, one of the saddest endings to a book I have ever read, because it's just it's all it is the protagonist of the book is just utterly defeated. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you can't get much more depressing than that, right? Um, Especially since it seemed like you really have no idea where the book is going to go. Throughout the book, it seems like at certain points it might be that it becomes sort of this revolutionary story, almost like the Hunger Games in a way, where he's going to create a revolution. Like he's going to join, what's his name? I forgot, the guy that wrote the book that's supposed to be the guy fighting the party to try to cause a revolution.
Yeah, I can't remember that guy's name. I think it started with a B.
But but
I haven't
so
read that book
but
in
so at
forever.
certain points you think that, well, okay, this that's how it'll go, right? That he's gonna meet this guy and he's going to start some kind of revolution, and it'll end. The book will end with, and everyone lived happily ever after, and the evil government was overthrown. And then that doesn't happen, and then you think he's probably just going to die. By the point when he's in prison, it seems like he's most likely just not going to survive at all. And it gets even worse by the fact that he doesn't even. It's not that he. You could say that he metaphorically dies, but he essentially just gives up, and they just let
Mm.
him live with the fact that you know that there's nothing he can do, that he can't win, and so he just by the end sort of just accepts it and moves on.
He did, however, get free coffee,
That is
so
true.
maybe Big Brother ain't
And
so bad after all.
do you know what always thought was weird though? I never understood why is it that Winston, who's the protagonist, um, didn't go back to Juliana. That's her name, right? The girl he falls in love with.
Julia.
Julia. Okay. I never understood why he didn't go back to her, and it explains it a little bit by the fact that, well, they both sort of hate each other a little bit, but understand that they both sold each other out um, during their interrogation. But also it it seems to sort of slide over it as though, well, they're just too damaged now. Like their brains are just sort of, they don't care about each other anymore. Which I guess you could say is because almost the reason they were in love was because of the fact that it was almost like they weren't in love with each other so much as they were in love with the idea of not having to obey the party. Does that make
Exactly,
sense?
because you see, love is a complex thing that usually is derived from shared experiences, but really, besides rebelling with each other, which they barely even met each other to do,
Right.
Julia and Winston, they didn't really communicate with each other, so it's not really love. They're
Right.
just kind of
They
infatuated and passionate because of the rebellion they're doing.
Well, that's what's interesting though, is that that's a good point, because it also shows that in this world it's almost like love is impossible, because there is no personal connection with an individual. You know, like they even when the O'Brien is the party member that we see most often, that he says that eventually we're just gonna make it so that all these emotions and stuff are just going to be gone. Like they just won't matter, you know. Um, which it, again paints the bleakest picture, and it's almost unimaginable, you know. But one thing I thought was really interesting was how they, and this is probably the thing I think the book focuses on the most, is the restriction of free speech, and how I hope you remember that there's a portion where a part of the book where Winston sees that the newest dictionary, um, the meaning of the word freedom is changed, so that it no longer means like there is no more when someone says free, it doesn't mean um like I have the freedom to say what I want to say. It's like I think it's supposed to be that it's only freedom in the sense of like uh I can't remember exactly. It's something about like the freedom to obey the party. Like it's only it's they change the meaning of the word freedom so that you can't really express freedom anymore. Because if you can't express it, then there's nothing, you can't really think about it, you know? So it's it goes really deep with that idea of, if there's not a word for it, can you even, how do you know it's a thing, you know?
Yeah, I kind of understand what you're saying.
Um so I was curious, this was one thought though I had while reading it. And I was curious on your intake on this cuz you are you're still an atheist, right? As far as
I guess agnostic, atheist.
agnostic.
Yeah, I'm just kind of undecided right now.
Okay. Well, you're still, like I said before, I would still describe you as someone who's intelligent. You're not, an idiot. um and you obviously think about, you know, big issues like that, and have, you know, more complex ideas than other people. Um but so this was an an idea I was curious about, if what you thought about this. Do you think that the civilization of Oceania, that is in some way like a civilization, what a civilization would be if it didn't have like religion in it?
Well, yeah, the idea is in many Orwellian sort of societies, they try to destroy, like, God.
Hmm.
Uh, like the episode. Have you ever seen The Twilight Zone?
Yes. Which episode?
The Obsolete Man. It's the one with
Yes,
the
where
partiers.
it's where the
Yeah.
person determines if a person is obsolete and whether they're not useful anymore. And he
Yeah.
and the guy, and there's an old man who owns a Bible, and so they are going to, I think they call it liquidation, right? They don't even call it execution in that episode. Um,
You get to choose the method of your execution. He chose a bomb.
that's right. That's right. And so, but so the reason he's executed is because of the fact that that God's obsolete in the society they live in.
Well, yeah. But one of the things it touches on upon is how the party had, proved that there is no God. So the idea is that if people are believing in something that's more powerful or more benevolent than the party, then they won't really be serving the party. They'll be serving God and kind of
Hmm.
serving the party second. So they try to destroy the idea of God so that everybody will be allegiant to them. Or you
Right.
can go the opposite way and try to say, like, we have been ordained by God to do this. We are God's, like, chosen
Right,
people.
which would be a
Hitler did this a lot.
theocracy. Yeah. Is there any books that
Well, I
have
mean,
done that idea? Because I don't most of the time, people when they create dystopian government rule, it's usually Orwellian, you know. But I've always
well,
thought it would be interesting if you went the exact opposite way and said, and had control entirely based on uh, based on a theocracy.
Well, I mean, there are some cases of this. Have you played Warhammer 40K? Because humanity basically hyper-militarized and they worship, the god emperor of mankind. So there's stuff like that.
Hmm.
Uh, there's also Final Fantasy X, which is where the whole world is pretty much controlled by the Church of Spira. That's a really good game. You should play it.
Hmm.
There's also, what else is there? Powerful religion. I can't pull anything else out of my hat right now, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of other great stories regarding that.
Well, one thing though that idea of God being obsolete though is another good comparison that that's with another book is have you ever read Brave New World?
Yes, I have.
Yes. Well, that I always thought was really interesting how they tackled religion in that, where there's the savage who has never seen any of this crazy society that these people live in, and then the one of the top leaders of the society brings him into this massive library, and then he gets to see and there's like only he owns like the last copies of every religious book on the earth, and he gets to like read the Bible and stuff like that, and he talks to him about it, and he's asking him, well, why is it you restrict people from seeing this, and he essentially tells him that it's not necessary. They don't need it for anything, so there's no point in me giving it to them. And that and what's interesting though is that he even says God's probably real, but even so, it's not necessary for me to give it to anyone. So it's strange in how Orwellian dystopian, you know, literature, how that deals with the topic of religion in that way. Do you think though? Do you think
Yeah.
that religion is important in a society?
Well, yes and no. I would argue it isn't necessary the way setting up like a strong economic system is. However,
Right.
a lot of people are comforted by religion and stuff. It's just one of those things that humans tend to use and be a part of. So
Hmm.
I would say, yeah, religion is integral to it because typically people are going to create beliefs that exist outside of the scientific consensus. If you look back at almost any civilization in human history, there's some form of religion. Even the ones who've never talked to each other. Mayans, Aztecs, Chinese, Japanese, Europeans, Africans, the Middle East, they all have these religions.
Right.
Oftentimes, they'll have like, themes that'll come into play in the religion, like somebody come back to life or something. But the general idea is that they all have some sort of religion. I don't think there's any actual atheistic civilization ever in the history of mankind, unless you count like Cro-Magnons, but but that was just because that was a different level of human thinking back then.
Hmm. Well, it's an interesting question though of because you've probably heard like atheist speakers talk about religion before, correct?
Hmm.
So something and a lot of them think that it's their job to disprove religion. Like they don't want people to uh, believe in a religion, you know. Um, but something that I wonder though is would a society look like Oceania if there was no religion? Do you think, or would it at least look somewhat close to that?
That's such a broad question we can't really determine.
Hmm.
Little things can totally change a civilization completely. Like
Right.
if the
Right.
Library of
Of course. That I mean,
Alexandria had been
it's
burned
a
down,
yeah. It's a big. I understand it's a big question I'm asking. Like, hey, does religion would that just make us? Would it make it a society Orwellian if you just took it out completely? But go ahead.
yeah, a lot of it depends on if it was forcefully taken out. If it came out naturally, just people just kind of stop believing, like I don't know Santa, uh, then I guess possibly it just could go either way. But if they're forcefully like trying to restrain religion, that's Orwellian because you're basically destroying like freedom of ideas and freedom of speech. So that would pretty much be a definition be Orwellian, in a sense.
Okay.
The thing is, so many factors make up human civilization that it's almost impossible to predict. Like if the Library of Alexandria had been burned down, we probably would have faster light travel right now, I would argue, because they had like working models of the early steam engine, like at 0 AD. Imagine if
Oh,
we had
wow.
gotten the combustible engine 1,000 years earlier, where would we be now?
Huh. That is an
Yeah,
interesting idea. Yeah.
a lot of
So,
people have argued that religion will a lot of people argue that religion like kind of holds down science and technology, but actually it's not really accurate. It's only accurate for the past 200 years, and fundamentalism became like a heavy thing because back in the old days religion actually pushed a lot of science, because the only people who could like map out astronomical charts and stuff were like priests and monks, and
mhm.
they really were responsible for the scientific advances of the past
And
1,000 years.
a while ago, it used to be thought of that it was, people thought it was a religious, almost like a duty to learn science, because it was learning and understanding the world that whatever religion that person ascribed to, it was to understand how that God made that world, and to
Mm-hmm.
understand the depths of it, and in that kind of way. So yeah, it's so let me ask you this question then. Do you think religion is good for society or bad? Or do you
Well,
think it just sort of is there?
the thing is, religion is just an idea like almost anything else. It can be used for good or bad. People are going to do bad things regardless whether or not they have religion. They're going to do good things regardless of. However, I live in a very religious area of Utah, very heavily Mormon,
Hmm.
and I would say religion is doing pretty much good things here. Just the community service and stuff is just crazy here. So religion can do very good things. It's not
Yeah.
about whether or not religion is good. It's whether or not good ideas or bad ideas are there.
Yeah. That's a very smart answer, I think. Um, so another point though that the book touches on is how war is well, more along the lines of just the purpose that war serves, um, because it goes over that there's three different nations basically in the world in 1984, and that there's Oceania, and then there's, I forgot what the other two were, but one of them is, I think, Russian. I think it's where Russia used to be.
Eurasia, I think.
Yes, Eurasia and East Asia. Isn't that what I think that's what it is? I think so. I might be wrong about that. But so one of them is basically Asian, right? And then another one is, I think, Russian. The last one's Russian or American, isn't it? I th-
Hmm.
I think it's Russian.
Something like that.
Um, but yeah, so but it goes over how the purpose, and they're all, one of them is always at war with the other, right? There's never one that's just not a part of any conflict, and so one day it might be we're at war with Eurasia, and the next day it's we're at war with East Asia. And so the purpose of that is because it keeps people in constant oppression, because when you're in war you have an excuse to make people essentially poor, and you know in a more oppressed climate, and you can't,
Well,
and nobody can just say, why is everything so bad. You can just say, well, we're at war, and war times are not good.
yeah, because it's not really about keeping people poor. Wars actually boost economies. If you look at World War II, it
Right.
basically just fixed the Great Depression by itself.
I don't mean poor,
But
you
you
know what I
do
mean.
do
I
is,
don't mean poor, but I mean,
yeah.
like, yeah, go ahead.
But what you do is that you use it to foster nationalism. So basically, a good example of this is in World War One. A group of Americans actually just basically beat a German man. I don't remember if he survived. And so the jury exonerated them, even though there was overwhelming proof that they did it. And so then one of the jurors said, now they can't say run patriotic now. And so they basically deemed people innocent just as a result of supernatural nationalism. And so it's basically if you have everybody focusing on this enemy, this great evil in the lands afar, they won't like look internally and say, hey, our government is now kind of corrupt, because instead anybody who says that is basically deemed a traitor and just hated by the public.
Right. It creates fervent hysteria almost of almost a sense of what is it's a shift in what is politically correct to say.
Mm-hmm.
That like you said, you are a traitor if you think differently than what is most popular. Um, but so it goes over war in that sense. It also goes over um, it gets during the portion where, and this is probably where what most people are familiar with from the book, is Winston's interrogation over,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's several months. Um, it gets really metaphysical. Goes over a lot of mind blowing concepts. Like I think most people remember this, who've read it. That there's the part where O'Brien is has strapped Winston to this table, and he has a little dial, and he can shock. I think it's supposed to be that he shocks him. Um, it doesn't say specifically, but I assume shocks him, and he can change the dial to 1 to 10 and how much pain it causes him. And so there he puts 4 lights in front of him, and he asks him how many lights there are, and he says, there's 4. And he says, and if the party says that there's 5 lights, how many are there? And he says there's 4. And then he shocks him, and so he is trying to change his perception to be whatever he says it is. And he says um, that if I were to tell you I can levitate off the floor right now, and you believe me, then what's to say that I can't do that? And it gets which when you think about it, it almost makes you wonder, is that actually true? Is it makes you think about, is everything simply what we perceive it to be? Is reality just our perception? But yeah,
Well, people have
what do you think?
speculated that the universe is like a hologram or something,
Right.
and in a way, the
Or
universe
like the
is
Matrix
kind.
idea, like what's his name, Descartes. Uh, Gosh, what was his name? The guy who the philosopher who came up with the concept that maybe nothing's real, and he proved to himself that everything was real over by logical evaluation of everything. You remember who I'm talking
I'm trying
about?
to remember who that is.
Uh, his last name was like Descartes. I can't remember exactly what it was. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. Never mind. Continue.
Oh no, I just wanted to hear what you had to say. But but yeah, what did you think? What do you think of that whole concept of reality is your perception?
Well, I would say that it's pretty much impossible to prove the nature of reality because like you can't prove the universe is a hologram because there's no really way of proving that. It's like it's kind of like how you can't prove or disprove God. It's just an concept you can't really
Right.
kind of
Well,
factually
there's
determine.
right. Well, this is what I almost think it's funny in a way. I'm curious if you do too. That people seem obsessed with the idea of proving, and when I say proving, I mean being like, this is 100% certain. Um, Things that are just not possible to prove. For example, um, the beginning of the universe. What caused it? How did it happen? When did it happen? You can't prove any of those things, no matter what. There's no, because ultimately no one saw it, no one recorded it on their phone, no one wrote it down, you know, you can't prove any facts about it. It's something that, you know, same thing of like, where did all life come from? You can't prove that because there isn't any empirical evidence of it, you know. But yeah, go ahead. Would you disagree?
Well, here's a question. Is knowledge absolute?
That's an interesting question. So to clarify, you're saying, is knowledge a are you saying, is knowledge a solid thing, as in it doesn't, can you clarify a bit just so I can understand more perfectly?
Can you 100% know something, or is there the smallest chance you might be wrong, no matter what you think?
Okay. Um See, I don't really think you can know anything. I mean, even someone who I think ascribes to a particular belief system, I don't think even they can, like for instance, okay, I believe in God, okay, but I can't
Mm.
be 100% sure that God is real. Now, does that mean that I don't believe in God? No. It's just that I simply, it's almost like a percentage game, you know. Whatever you
Mm.
think is more likely, you believe that. So see, that's interesting though. I think though that there are just assumptions though that we make, that we say, like for instance, I think when we say we know, I think that's just us saying we assume, because we can't really, if we were to say, you know, I mean, if we were to just take out the word knowledge entirely, it would be quite difficult to tiptoe around, you know, how to understand something, because, like for instance, you can't just go, well, we assume that gravity is real, but there's always the possibility that gravity is not real and it's simply another force that's keeping us to the ground, or maybe we're just imagining that gravity is real and we're all actually floating. You know what I mean? If I think we have to make, I think that knowledge is really your assumptions, or no, not assumptions necessarily, but your best guess. What do you think?
At this point, we're getting into metaphysics and stuff where it basically just becomes conjecture. So I'm not sure there's much more we can add to this conversation.
Well, that's sad. I'm sure there were plenty of people who were like, what is he going to say? People were on the edge of their seats wondering, what will he say? What great wisdom will he give us? And his answer is, there's nothing more that we can add to this conversation. So so do you think though that do you think the book juggles all these different themes and elements well?
I would say, yeah, Orwell never really, like, he uses a scalpel, not a hammer. A lot of these ideas are very subtle and never, expressively said, so I think he does a really good job with it. The best way to write a story is to have the reader write it themselves, in the sense that they will come to these conclusions by themselves when reading your work. You shouldn't have to
Right.
explain the Aesop of your story.
It's interesting because a lot of stories focus on building the world, you know, rather than necessarily
Mm.
the story elements. Um, I'm trying to think of a good example of that. I don't want to say Hunger Games, but again, but um, I'll just use it anyway. Hunger Games, for example, though, puts a lot of effort into building the world and letting you know specifically. No. Okay, I know a better example. Brave New World is a much better example of that.
Mm-hmm.
It focuses almost entirely on just, and I'm not saying there's no plot elements in there that aren't good, but it focuses mostly on building the world. Another example would be like Dante's Inferno, and giving you a clear mental image of what it is and the complexity and depth to that image. But I think in 1984 it does it really well by using the plot elements to hint towards this is what the world is like, by making characters act a particular way, by having them take certain actions that then lead you to understand that this is just how the world is. They're doing these things based on the world that they live in, and so you get the idea that, and there's some exposition, in 1984 where Winston will just say, "This is just a thing," he'll kind of like, for instance, when he's at his office, he'll just sort of talk about how, like we said about war, he just says that there's always somebody that's at war with someone else, and this is just the way the world is. And so in that sense, it does some world building, but I think it mostly relies on just the character development, showcasing what kind of world they live in. What do you think, though?
Well, Brave New World was kind of based entirely upon its world, so it makes sense
Right.
that the story is just trying to share as much of its world as possible. Now, for a lot of fantasy fiction stuff, ever since J.R.R. Tolkien sort of changed the genre, a lot of people have been trying to build worlds, and some of them doing a better job than others. A good example, I guess, would be Hogwarts from Harry Potter, since a lot of people recognize it, because Hogwarts
Right.
was the coolest part of the Harry Potter books. I don't really care about whatever Harry's doing. I just think Hogwarts is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes building an entire story around a world can work, but oftentimes it doesn't very well. Look
Well,
at Final Fantasy 13.
yeah. I think what it does most of the time is it makes people love the world, but they don't love the story itself. Um, like there's plenty of examples where somebody will make a movie, and they'll make the movie and it'll be bad, but people will still say that's a cool idea for a movie. It's just that the execution was lacking. So I think that's the problem that some people find, is that they have a really good concept, but they don't know how to execute it to get that idea across.
There's a bit of a saying I read in a book. It's everybody is a great story, but not everybody is great editors. And how most books, they're how good they are, how bad they are, is pretty much determined entirely by how good the proofreading is and how many changes you make. Because nobody has ever, sold a copy of their first draft of a book. At least it's never been a good one. So
Right.
a lot of it just comes down to how good you are. It's not a question of how good your ideas are. It's how good you can extrapolate on them and make something good out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You could make a book entirely about a guy and his life, and he works a 9 to 5 job, comes home, sleeps for 8 hours, and goes back to his job. And you could make that a brilliant book and win Pulitzers if you're a good enough author.
Right. If you are, good enough at showcasing even the most boring of ideas, it can lead to extraordinary results. I think an example, though, of where building the world, focusing on the world building more than the story, and I'm sure there are people who would disagree with me on this, but to me, though, like Dante's Inferno, focuses mostly on the world building, and I understand why, because of the idea of the book. But still, like I mean, if you read it, at least to me, it's just so much just bleak, it's a consistent feeling with no change. There's no real alteration in the story. There's nothing that feels dynamic and that really changes. It's just constant reminders of, hey, this is what hell is like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of something I think that has shown up recently in the past 20 years. It feels like every story has to have like, a grand conclusion where all the threads wrap up, and I think it's kind of bad. Sometimes it's good to have like a story thread just be left unresolved. Like even if your heroes win at the end, it'd be cool if like they still remember there's something out there or just something to keep it mysterious, you know?
Right. Right. It is amazing though. It is interesting though just how I think that our standards and our hopes for what is considered good storytelling, how I think they've risen a lot in the past couple decades. And now it's not to say, oh, books before the past couple decades were all awful, but I think that there's a lot more criticism of stories now on smaller things that would have been considered smaller previously today than maybe like 100 years ago. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's our criticism of stories is still hasn't really changed much?
Well, compared to say 300 years ago, our standards have really risen because it's a more competitive marketplace. Because there weren't
Right.
that many books in the 1800s, so one book could be considered great. But in modern standards, when you compare it to all these other stuff, it's just not so good by comparison. Because if you read a lot of old books, they actually suck. Like 1 second. So have you ever seen Journey to the Center of the Earth?
No, but the movie or the book?
The I said scene, so the movie.
Okay. That's why I asked. I wasn't sure if you meant had read. I've seen the movie, and it's not very good.
Well, yeah, the movie was poorly reviewed just because it's kind of a dumb concept. It's like people go to the center of the earth and there's dinosaurs and stuff.
And
But
it's
see,
and
the
it's
thing
way
is that
bigger than you
yeah,
would think. It's like a different planets for some reason.
yeah, and pressure doesn't exist. But anyway, that's actually
Right.
a book from
It's supposed to be like a
1864
ball of
by
metal
Jules Verne.
at the center of the earth because there's so much pressure and heat. And when they go there,
Mm.
it's just like, yeah, everything's fine. There's just dinosaurs down here.
Because when you analyze a lot of old books, you realize that a lot of them are really bad by modern standards. Like A Christmas Carol, when you
Hmm.
when you actually read it, it's actually kind of a lame story because Scrooge is really the good guy. Because what was the guy's name? The worker, Mr. Pevensey or something. I don't know.
Hmm.
Basically, it mentions this. Like there's a bowl of fruit on his table, like foreign fruit, like oranges. Now think about this. He's a guy living in 19th century England. That stuff is very, very expensive, and he can't afford to like make payments for like his kids, medicine. So this guy is just throwing away all his money, and we're supposed to think Scrooge is the bad guy for not paying him enough, and really this guy is just throwing away his money. And this is really, when you look back on it, Scrooge is totally justified in everything he did. He was really the good
Hmm.
guy.
I never thought
Yeah,
about
because
that. That is
they
interesting.
complain about not they complain about like Scrooge not giving like his work like a full day of Christmas off. But when you
Hmm.
look back at like 19th century England, like nobody had Christmas off. That wasn't even a real holiday until A Christmas Carol came out. Nobody took
Right.
Christmas off.
Well,
So really, Scrooge was the good guy.
I think though, when it comes to A Christmas Carol, I think the purpose is more in the metaphor of what the story is supposed to be about, not necessarily the well, I agree with you that it does seem to indicate that Scrooge is really the good guy in the story. Uh, I think the message of A Christmas Carol is more about it's obviously supposed to be about be charitable, right? That's really the
Hmm.
ultimate message. So I think it's just like, listen, you don't want to make him an unredeemable bad guy, but you also need him to be slightly bad. So making it something like that, where it's like, oh, he's not paying his guy, a little bit more money so he can help his son, even though, if he saved up money, then he could probably afford to help his son. But I think it's trying to focus more on the message than necessarily the I don't want to say quality of writing, but the cohesion of the story.
Well, the thing is, the quality of the writing is actually really good. Again, it's the idea that's a problem. For one,
Right.
Scrooge was paying his employee like 50% over the average wage for a worker of his skill level. So really, he was paying what's this guy's name? Uh, Bob Cratchit, that's right. And so he's paying Bob Cratchit, like in modern terms, like $50,000 a year. And so then Bob Cratchit is turning around and wasting this money on things that are completely unnecessary. That's like if I paid one of my employees, $6,000 a year, and he buys 2 sports cars and goes into debt. How is that my fault? Why should I pay for his mistakes? That's just
Right.
rewarding bad behaviors. Scrooge was totally justified in everything he did. Was a good guy at the beginning. He honestly should not have done the things he did. The only redeeming version is the Disney version, which actually portrays a Cratchit that's actually poor.
Mm-hmm.
And the Disney version is the one, Donald Duck and Mr. Scrooge one, the cartoon one, not the
Right.
CGI one.
Right.
I mean, yeah, charity's a good idea, but when you actually dissect the book, Scrooge actually made a lot of bad decisions there. He should have just kind of left Cratchit to his devices and try to take custody of Tiny Tim. That would have been much better.
You feel bad for him then, because if you go through the book thinking that that he's the good guy, it turns into quite a sad story then of this guy being tormented over something that's totally justified.
I feel bad for Scrooge. I I honestly don't think Christmas Carol is a good book.
Hmm.
Like again, the Disney cartoon version was really good, but the uh, the book itself isn't that great. A lot of old books, when you get down to it, are really bad and full of plot holes, like Treasure Island or what's that one? Wuthering Heights. I never liked that one.
Okay, I have a question. Okay, I know somebody that's planning on reading that. Okay, what exactly is the whole deal with that book? Because I just well, was in a Barnes and Noble one day, and I picked up and looked at the description on the back of it, and it was like, I can't remember what it was. It was something about like the about abuse and dark romance or something like, and something like that. What is the if you were to just give me a brief description of what the concept is for Wuthering Heights, what is it?
Basically, this one guy, he goes to basically rent a house from this guy called Heathcliff, and it's basically just like this. How slowly it reveals like Heathcliff's life, how he's like adopted by this rich guy, but he was never like really one of the kids. And then I think he has like a romance with like one of his adopted sisters. It's just really weird and not. It just doesn't go anywhere. It's just a boring book. I
Okay,
would not advise reading it, but it's up to him.
all right, I understand. Thank you. But so anyway, okay, back to 1984. There was one thing that really inspired me to want to do the first podcast on 1984 was I watched this clip. It was this clip from the end of a documentary on George Orwell, and it ended with somebody saying a quote from him about and O'Brien says this in 1984 too, where he says that if you want a picture of the future, imagine a human face being stomped on by a boot forever. And I hadn't it made me think, and it ends with him saying, and if you don't want this to happen, then it's your job to make sure that you stop it from happening. And I sort of I was thinking, what does he want people to do exactly? Like, what would stop, the world from becoming like Oceania, or any country really?
Well, for starters, the thing about authors is they never really have an end game as far as social change goes. They're just telling the story. So I don't
Right.
think it really intended for there to be any way for people to kind of resist you just saying, "Hey, this is probably going to happen. It's going to suck."
Of
So I don't think
course,
they
yeah.
really planned for any way to fight it. Now, the best way to go against these things is whenever somebody tries to redefine a word, like sort of how they were doing doublespeak, uh, that you generally want to stay away from them because people who try to redefine words are trying to redefine the way you think. Because like there is this sort of movement where racism equals like oppression plus prejudice, so that only
Hmm.
people in power can be racist. However, people when they think racism, they still think of the old term, they still have that connotation to it. So when people try to redefine a word like that, they're just trying to say, so only we can be the good guys. So whenever
Well,
somebody tries to
yeah.
redefine a word, they're pretty much almost always the bad guys.
Hmm. So do you think? Let me ask you this: do you think, uh, like social justice warriors, for example, do you think that that those are the bad guys in Orwell's mind? Like to
Most
him,
of them are well.
that because um, they enforce things like political correctness, and uh, you could easily argue the idea that only certain groups are oppressed, and they can only and that they wish to, I suppose, what's the word, demonize um certain other groups as being, these people are all bad, and these groups are oppressed, and so the people who we are saying are oppressing the oppressors, nothing there, they cannot ever be oppressed themselves. It's only the group that we're for that can ever be oppressed. Do you think that Orwell would see that as trying to move towards something, trying to move towards something like Oceania?
Well, this is going to take a second for me to describe a lot of points. For one, a lot of these people are well intentioned. There's lots of good people in every group.
Of course, yeah.
This is mostly the extremists I'm referring to.
Hmm.
But there's this thing called Horseshoe Theory, where, like, as far as political leanings go, like, as you get further away from the middle, the two sides become more accurate. So if you're far left and you take a far left person and a far right person, they're more similar than you think. They both want like things like fascism and stuff, just like in a different flavor.
Hmm.
So a lot of these people do kind of they push fascism uh, and stuff like that, like reparations, where white people should pay black people because their ancestors were enslaved, which I think is dumb. But that's a different point.
Mm.
And there's also the same where there's an expression: there are no bad tactics, only bad targets. Or they try to push these ideas where it's okay if we do it, but it's not okay if they do it, because then that means that they're always the good guys and they're always right, which is again is a bad idea.
Right.
And what else? Sometimes some of these people are getting actually really violent. Some Black Lives Matter protesters tried to burn a man alive in Charlotte. So
Yeah, I heard about that.
yeah. So basically, there's good and bad groups on both sides. The problem is that a lot of these social justice warriors are going too far left to the point where it's getting kind of dangerous and just bad ideas. The best, if somebody describes themselves as saying, "I am a Democrat" or "I'm a Republican," their ideas probably aren't good because they're defining themselves in this way, and they're not going to change their ideas probably. The best people are the ones who say, "I don't identify with either group. I just go with the ideas that are good." Because I don't identify as a Democrat, I don't identify as a Republican, because both groups have good qualities to them, and I'm just going to make the best decisions based on the information I have, not because, oh, I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to vote Democrat or whatever.
Well, okay, I got a question to clarify that point. So when you say that a person uh, should not define themselves as associating with a particular political group, do you mean that they should not uh, at all define themselves in that way? Like, for instance, if I walk up to ask you and say, if you had to put yourself in a political group, which one would you be in? Or do you mean like they should not be like, I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat and I do not like you? Is that what you mean, or do you mean my first example?
Probably the first example. Just when you identify with a group so heavily that it becomes part of your personality, you invest in it. And so when you invest in these groups, there's a sunk cost fallacy where it makes it difficult to change because you say, I've already put so much time and effort into this, I don't want to change because that would mean I wasted all that time. So whenever you identify heavily with a group, it just makes it difficult to change your ideas. And you start going into like these echo chambers because if you say, I'm a Republican, you start, maybe sign up for Facebook groups or whatever that are very pro-Republican.
Mm.
And so then you're only hanging out with the Republican people and it's creating this feedback loop where you think you're always right and you're right and the other people are idiots. But in actuality, it's a lot more complex than that.
Let me ask you, I have a question to ask you because I've thought about this lately. Do you think the people that we should really try to try to maybe associate ourselves with are the people who are more middle leaning in all like I'm trying to think of in all degrees of subjects, like for example, political leanings, religion, philosophical beliefs, whatever you want to name it, that we should try to put ourselves more in the group that's more middle leaning rather than. Now I don't necessarily, when I say belief systems or things like that, I more mean like we shouldn't try to polarize ourselves, and as in like we shouldn't hang out with, if you believe, if you're an atheist or you're religious person, you shouldn't necessarily go hang out with the Puritans and the atheists who think that religion should die. You know what I mean? Do you think that we should be like that, where we should try to be, associate ourselves with more middle-leaning people? Because it keeps us not so, put into that kind of echo chamber.
The thing is that when people push too far to the left or right, they're only seeing things from a single perspective usually. And so the best thing you want to do is look with eyes unclouded by hate, basically, which is an old saying. You want to look at everything in a balanced way. Even if your ideas are very far left, people who will look at both sides will usually describe themselves as a moderate, even if most of their ideas be described as very liberal. So basically, you don't want to really spend too much time with far left groups because that just leads dangerous ideas and you start thinking that you're always right, the other guys are idiots, you can't be wrong.
Like we shouldn't hang out with the social justice warriors, and we also shouldn't hang out with necessarily and when I say social justice warrior, I mean like the people who would the people I'm talking about, or the like the alt-right, for example. We shouldn't try to be in those groups. That we should lean towards the more moderate, so that we aren't clouded by our own views, that we lock ourselves into them and think, well, the other side is evil, and so I am perfect, everything I do is correct. And because that does happen. Like, you see that happen where, I think especially in this election, I saw that a lot, where people on like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton's side constantly made excuses for their candidate to make it seem as though they were perfect. For example, like when Donald Trump's the recorded tape came out about him, right? The left then wished to demonize him for it, and the right not so much, but tried to make a lot of excuses and apologies for him. And same thing with, I think, Hillary Clinton's email scandal that's happened. The right tries to demonize her for it, and the left tried to make apologies for it and excuses. Do you so I think we agree on that point that being more moderate is better, because then you're not locked into that kind of echo chamber where you are just, you're almost I don't want to say not free to think your own ideas, but you can take what you think is correct from both sides and then form your own, opinions from that. You don't necessarily have to believe everything that your particular group that you're in believes. I think we agree on that point, correct?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's not so much about being moderate, it's about just simply seeing the other side's point of view.
Right. So so do you think, though, that that's most prevalent, the not seeing, which do you think it's more prevalent in, that idea of not seeing the other person's point of view and not, acknowledging that maybe they have a point? Do you think that's more prevalent, that people do that more in when it comes to politics or discussion about religion?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. What was that?
Do you think people do that where they don't look at the other person's point of view and say, well, maybe they have a point? Do you think they do that more in political discussion or religious discussion?
I think that people are more likely to change their political opinions than religious ones because with religion, you typically have already invested a lot into it, so people don't want to change that. Most people stick with the religion they were raised into.
Right. Well, something though that this annoys me a lot, and I don't know why this quite is, but and these are the extreme. These are the extremes. The very polarized opposites. Like, for instance, like Christians in America, there are some who I've seen who say things about atheists that I don't agree with. Like, they think that atheists are evil, that atheists are satanic in some way. And then there's atheists on the opposite end who think that like religion should be destroyed, and that no one should be religious, and that there's no good reason to be religious ever. And likewise, the Christian will make the point that there's no good reasons, there's no reason to ever be an atheist. Do you think that's quite prevalent today of that happening?
A lot of it depends where you go. If you visit the atheism subreddit, well, that is just a big hole of cancer.
I will say this:
Really...
there's nothing to me more depressing than simply watching two atheists sit and talk about religion. Because to me, I don't know why they do it. I'll be honest. I don't know if I can't figure out, is it that they enjoy talking about it, or do they dislike talking about it? Because if they dislike talking about it, then aren't they just punishing themselves by putting themselves through just I don't know.
That's a bit of human psychology. If you go into like a maybe like a Republican memes or like a Democrat memes sort of Facebook group, you'll see they spend more time insulting the other people than they do talking about themselves. Because it's easier to attack somebody than to support your own ideas.
That's
true. That's just a bit of human psychology.
That's true. I never thought about that, but that's really interesting because really most of the time it's in any two groups that dislike one another, it's always, here's why the other person is worse than me. Oh my gosh, now that I think about it, that's all that this election was. You know it? It was nothing but, here's why Hillary Clinton is worse than I am, and here's why Donald Trump is worse than me. I may not be very good, but at least I'm not them. That's so sad that that anything would come to that, to where it's simply a matter of, the argument isn't which one is better, it's which one is worse than the other.
Yeah, because again, it's not easier to make the other guy look like a demon than make yourself look like an angel.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you
So I guess
think?
that's all.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, just that I have to wrap this up soon. I've got to go.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. We should probably we should probably be wrapping this up anyway. Thank you for appearing on here, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
I always enjoy talking to you. I feel like it's always a bit insightful. Me, maybe not so much. Maybe I just sort of ramble about random things.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we covered it. I think we've covered everything from metaphysics to Donald Trump. So I don't think there's much more we could talk about. Well, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please subscribe for more if you enjoyed this. And Agent California, thank you for appearing on here. Could not have done this without you.
Okay.
All right.
No problem. Good night.
Good night.